Breaking news in the eastern Mediterranean. A ballistic missile launched from Iran crossed three countries, Iraq, Syria, and the Mediterranean, before approaching the airspace of Turkey. Within minutes, missile defense systems linked to NATO fired interceptors and destroyed the incoming projectile. No casualties, but the story may be far bigger than a single missile. Because the flight path appeared to be heading toward Incirlik Air Base, one of the most sensitive military installations in the NATO alliance, a base believed to store American nuclear weapons. If that was the intended target, this incident could represent one of the most dangerous moments between Iran and NATO in modern history. And it raises a critical question tonight. Was this an accident or a test of NATO's red line? There is an air base in southern Turkey, in the province of Adana, about 70 kilometers from the Syrian border. At first glance, it looks like many other American military installations overseas. Runways, hangars, radar domes. But what lies beneath that base is something that fundamentally changes the strategic calculations of every military planner in the world. Not Patriot batteries, not THAAD missile systems, not squadrons of F-35 fighters. Something far more consequential. The base is Incirlik Air Base, and according to multiple arms control organizations and NATO nuclear sharing assessments, the base is believed to store approximately 50 to 60 American B-61 nuclear gravity bombs. Weapons kept not in open bunkers but in hardened underground WS-3 vaults, built during the Cold War. These weapons are part of NATO's nuclear sharing doctrine, an arrangement where U.S. nuclear weapons are stored in allied countries and could, in a wartime scenario, be delivered by allied aircraft. For decades, those weapons have remained in place. They survived the Cold War. They survived the failed 2016 Turkish coup attempt, when power to the base was temporarily cut and U.S. aircraft were grounded. They survived every regional crisis since. Until now, they had never been directly threatened. On Wednesday, March 4, 2026, a ballistic missile launched from Iran began a trajectory that would cross multiple national airspaces. According to Turkish defense officials, the missile passed through Iraq, then Syria, and then entered the eastern Mediterranean. Its flight path was consistent with a medium-range Fateh 110 variant, a missile designed for precision strikes within the Middle East. As the missile approached Turkish airspace, NATO missile defense assets deployed in the Mediterranean intercepted it. Fragments later fell in the Dürtyol district of Hatay province, according to the Turkish Ministry of Defense. No casualties were reported, but the implications of that interception may be far larger than the debris on the ground, because this may represent the first time NATO forces engaged an Iranian ballistic missile in active defense of a member state's airspace. The immediate question is simple. Where was the missile actually going? Turkish officials speaking anonymously suggested one possibility. The missile may have been intended for a target in Cyprus, possibly a military installation, but drifted off course. But analysts looking at the trajectory raise a different possibility. Missiles do not typically drift across three countries in a perfectly calculated arc before suddenly missing their target. Ballistic trajectories are programmed, guided, calculated, which leads to the uncomfortable question now circulating in defense ministries across Europe. Was the missile actually aimed at Incirlik Air Base? If so, that would represent something extraordinary, because Incirlik is not just a military installation. It is a nuclear weapons storage site inside a NATO country. Since 1949, NATO has been built around a single principle, Article 5, the doctrine that an attack on one member is an attack on all. But the alliance has spent decades carefully avoiding situations that might trigger it. According to defense analysts, including experts at the Royal United Services Institute, A deliberate strike on a NATO nuclear storage facility would represent one of the most serious escalations imaginable. It would place immediate pressure on the alliance to respond collectively, and it would force Turkey, which possesses one of NATO's largest militaries, to consider retaliation. But that is not what happened. At least, not yet. U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth addressed the incident at the Pentagon. His message was clear. The missile interception, he said, did not appear to meet the threshold required to trigger Article 5. In other words, a single missile, intercepted successfully, with no casualties, does not automatically transform into a collective NATO war with Iran. That distinction matters enormously, because invoking Article 5 would mean something very specific. Every NATO country, all 32 member states, would need to determine whether they were prepared to enter direct conflict with Iran. That is a decision few governments appear ready to make, at least not yet. Turkey's own response reflected that caution. Officials emphasized that Turkey reserves the right to defend its airspace, but framed any response within international law, rather than explicitly invoking NATO's collective defense clause. This subtle diplomatic language creates room for maneuver. It allows Turkey to act independently if necessary, without forcing the entire alliance into a formal war decision. It also reveals something deeper. NATO is walking a very narrow line, condemning the attack, supporting a member state, but avoiding a direct military escalation. At the same time this missile was intercepted, military activity across the eastern Mediterranean was intensifying. Airspace above Larnaca, Cyprus was temporarily closed after radar detected an unidentified aerial object. Over the previous days, Iranian-made drones had reportedly struck near the RAF Akrotiri. 2 additional drones were intercepted. Greek fighter jets scrambled. Greek naval frigates moved into position to support air defense operations. The United Kingdom deployed HMS Dragon, D-35, one of the Royal Navy's advanced air defense destroyers, into the eastern Mediterranean. In short, the region's airspace is becoming increasingly crowded with military assets. By midweek, the geographic scope of the conflict had widened dramatically. Events connected to the crisis were now unfolding across a vast map, including Iran, Iraq, Israel, Lebanon, Turkey, Cyprus, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Bahrain, Kuwait, the United Arab Emirates, and even the Indian Ocean. According to U.S. officials, an American submarine operating near Sri Lanka engaged and sank an Iranian naval vessel using a torpedo. If confirmed, it would represent the first U.S. submarine torpedo sinking of an enemy warship since World War II. Reports suggested the ship may have been the Iranian frigate Iris Dana, though details remain under investigation. Dozens of sailors were feared killed. Beyond the battlefield, another strategic player is watching closely: Russia. European natural gas prices surged sharply amid the instability. Energy analysts warn that prolonged disruption across Middle Eastern shipping lanes could tighten global supply even further. And that creates leverage. Because Europe's energy vulnerability remains a powerful geopolitical pressure point. In response to the missile interception, NATO issued a carefully worded statement. A spokesperson condemned Iran's actions and reaffirmed that NATO stands firmly with Turkey. But notably absent from the statement was any mention of invoking Article 5. This phrasing reflects a moment of strategic ambiguity. NATO has responded militarily, but it has not formally declared the situation an attack requiring collective defense. In other words, the alliance has drawn a line, but it has not yet decided whether crossing it means war. Military planners in Tehran are almost certainly studying the same conclusion that NATO strategists are now debating. One intercepted missile does not trigger Article 5, but a larger barrage, one capable of overwhelming missile defenses, might. Ballistic missile doctrine often relies on saturation attacks, where large numbers of missiles are launched simultaneously to overwhelm intercept systems. Which means the real question may not be what happened Wednesday, but what happens next. For more than 70 years, the entire architecture of NATO deterrence has been built around preventing exactly this kind of scenario. A missile approaching a NATO nuclear storage facility, intercepted in the air, with the alliance forced to decide whether it was an accident, a warning, or the opening move of something larger. For now, the official answer remains cautious, unacceptable, but not yet war. So the situation stands at a dangerous equilibrium. An Iranian missile crossed 3 countries. NATO shot it down. The alliance condemned the attack, but Article 5 was not invoked, which leaves the most important question unanswered. Was this a stray missile in a regional war, or the first probe of NATO's defensive threshold? Because if another missile comes, and this time it gets through, the next decision may not be about interception. It may be about war.